At Hotspotting, we often advise investors to build your team before you build your portfolio. And that means investing in services that improve your chances of success as property investors. One of the key services you need to have is a first-rate property manager working for you wherever in Australia you own real estate. In my view, a great property manager is gold, particularly in these days of a constantly changing landscape of new rules and regulations by state governments across the nation. So today I'm going to discuss the implications of that with one of Australia's best, Corinne Bohan of Image Property. Corinne, welcome.
Hi, Terry. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, nice to be here, but I imagine that life is very busy for a business that has property management at its core. Tell us a little bit about Image Property, what you do and where you do it.
Look, we service mostly Southeast Queensland. We manage properties and sell property from as far north as Noosa and as south as Gold Coast. We also have a small in Victoria in South Melbourne there. So mostly based up here in Southeast Queensland, but expanding down into Victoria and growing a great little rent roll down there too.
Okay.
We are very busy, as you say. It's a good thing to be. I guess we would be worried if we weren't busy, but yes, with all the changes according to legislation and just the current, supply and demand around rentals, the property management team are very much on their feet, which is a good thing.
Well, yeah, but I'm always amazed whenever I encounter investors who think that it makes sense to them to self-manage the properties that they own, perhaps to save a little bit of money. For me, it's a chronic case of false economy. I think there's just so many reasons why you really do need to have an expert on your team handling that area for you.
Yeah, look, I think there's far less people who are doing it on their own these days, to be honest. I think more and more, even just recently, the last lot of legislation changes that happened here in Queensland, I know that we had a number of calls at that point asking if, look, I've been self-managing for a while, but I'd like you to take it over. There's been minimum housing changes. There's been rent increases attached to the house. And there's just a lot of admin and legislative work around it, but also the difference a good property manager makes is far outweighs the fees that you pay. So we often find if they are self-managing that their rents are not necessarily in line with market value, and access to what market value is according to RP data and all that. That's all the kind of resources that our team have. So we never advise a landlord what their rents should be without giving them the market evidence to do so. So I don't think when you assign a property manager, you're looking for a professional in property. You're looking for somebody who understands the market. You're looking for somebody who understands the value of the asset. You're looking for somebody who understands what a good tenant is worth and how you manage your relationship with a tenant to make sure they are happy and you're keeping great tenants in place. And you're looking for also someone to advise you on your portfolio and what's the best course of action, if that be proactive maintenance, or if you need to be advised on what legislation changes are coming in, because they're coming in thick and fast. I think the last ones we found out about on the 6th of June, and they had to be implemented pretty much that day. So I don't know if you're not part of a professional organisation, how you manage those adjustments very quickly.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good topic to focus on first up. The legislative changes. I know we're aware because we're scouring news media and other sources every day, looking for information that informs what we do as a business that operates nationally. And we're aware that pretty much every state and territory has made significant changes to its rental laws in the past 1 to 2 years. It's been very, very hard for even the property managers to keep up with that, let alone the investor owners.
Yeah, it is really quite difficult. And I think we're a business that really prides ourselves on being process orientated. And so we can implement change quite effectively because of our processes. But at the same time, it feels at the moment, Queensland state government is probably the one we have the most exposure to, but Victoria is no real different. The changes are coming in quite reactively, as opposed to having a larger picture of what is needed long-term for housing and the supply of housing and the two parties involved in it. I think we always have to consider both parties. Like, there are landlords and investors are very much needed to supply stock for people who are going to be in the rental market, and renters are obviously a crucial part of it as well. So I think it'd be lovely if we could press pause, take a step back, and we could think about the needs of both parties, because both parties are crucial to this, and then be a little bit more proactive about the changes, as opposed to, hey guys, we're making this change next week, because I don't think that's sustainable. And I think it also creates a little bit of fear for investors to feel, if I'm investing, you know, these assets are quite regularly the best part of $1 million or more. They want to know that there's some security about how it's going to be handled, and that changes aren't going to come thick and fast that are going to affect the returns they can expect on them.
Yeah, you've certainly stolen from one of my favorite scripts. I'm doing a lot of broadcasting at the moment about the one-sided nature of government attitude to the whole equation about rental properties. As you point out, there are two parties to every transaction, and they seem to be considering the needs and problems of one side and disregarding the needs and problems of the other side. And I don't think that's a sustainable long-term solution.
No, not at all. Look, some of the changes they've brought in relation to tenants, I think, are great, especially here in Queensland. I think they're great. I think they're probably overdue, and they just create a much safer environment also for tenants, that they know what they're going to expect. There's one change that's coming in on the 30th of September where the break lease fee, like if you are breaking lease at a property, is going to be in a statutory formula that will be worked out based on what costs you can incur if you want to break lease. And I think that's actually probably really necessary, because not knowing what the cost of breaking lease will be, and that being at the determination of how good the agent is in securing a new tenant and so forth, is quite a real unknown place for a tenant to be. So there are certain changes that I think are valid. I think having an expectation of how quickly and how frequently we can increase the rent. So I think there is some changes on that side that are very valid, but I think that it's just about giving people time and knowing that we're not just going to be putting in new legislation and changes continuously until we find some magic button that fixes this whole problem, because I think that the problem's a little bit bigger than that too.
Okay. Part of our process here at Hotspotting is delving into news media on a daily basis, looking for information, news and views that inform what we do. We have a news feed that comes in early in the morning, and this morning there were 6 articles about the rental market shortage. 3 of them says that the rental boom is over, and the other 3 said that the rental boom was going to persist for many years to come. Which is kind of typical of the contradictions that we find in news media on a daily basis. But something that you and I were talking about recently was the possibility that we may at some point reach a ceiling in terms of where rents can go. We've had obviously a number of years of quite substantial increases, but is it reasonable to expect that to continue, or because of the economics of tenants, is it the reality that we're getting pretty close to a ceiling?
Yeah, look, I do think we're close to a ceiling. I think if you take half and half of what you saw in the media today, I think there is definitely a truth to the fact that, you know, the supply issue has not been met, but different things are happening in the market that I think it's worth paying attention to. Since the 1st of July here at Image, and we manage a rent roll of around 5,000 across Southeast Queensland. So we have a large exposure to what is going on, and we've done over 59 additional tenant applications since the 1st of July. So add-on tenants. We're regularly seeing that people are having friends move in with them, or mum or someone else is moving in. I think the days of having lots of spare rooms in our houses is possibly gone. I think there's a lot more professional couples looking to move in together who would have possibly liked to have taken an apartment by themselves. I think also the pool is being diminished by the amount of owner-occupiers who are now choosing, first home buyers who are now choosing to jump into the market because of where rents are at. But I don't think the increases can keep going the way they are. I think in the housing market, we've seen that they are starting in certain areas to not be able to find tenants for the properties at the price they're looking for, who can meet it with their affordability. So a good property manager should always be checking the affordability, the percentage of the annual rent to the annual wage, to make sure that whoever we're putting into your property is going to be able to financially sustain the rental payments. And for many, many years, we've done it on a 30% of the annual income is what we would like the tenant to be able to comfortably achieve their rent payments without having any other financial stress. And that's getting harder and harder in certain areas, because you've seen, like, as far out, like only a couple of years ago, if you're paying $700 a week for a property, you were in a city, you were living, like, it was a very nice, like, that's now becoming a median price across Brisbane, further out in the suburbs. And we just have not seen the same wage increase. We haven't. So I think you've already seen a lot of people go to units who would have possibly previously preferred a house. And hence the rental yields on units is tracking along very nicely here in Queensland particularly. And units are still very sought after as well. But days on market on average is sitting around 18. So it's not like put it up and it's immediately gone. I think we are seeing that affordability is becoming a bit of a thing. We've also got to make sure that the tenants coming in with a good rental history and things like that, to be putting the right people in the properties for our landlords as well. So yeah, I don't think it is just an endless up. I don't think that's sustainable at all.
Yeah. I know that's part of the role of a property manager to look at the applications for an available rental and assess those applications, vet the tenants. But I was surprised when we had a recent discussion about this, just at the lengths that you go to make sure that you're getting the absolute best tenant. Tell us a little bit about some of those processes.
Yeah, it's a huge part of what our team does for an owner. So we go through a whole process of when we get an application in and the tenant provides that application, where we validate all of the information given to us. We validate what their employment history is, their rental reference history. We go back as far as their 2 previous, if we can get that on record. If they have been renting twice, we then look through like their professions and everything like that, what they're doing, and put the whole picture together to present to the landlord, so that we also check and make sure that they're not registered on Ticker. Ticker's a service where you can register somebody if they have left a property with damage or with, like, you know, a large amount of debt owing, and they've followed the procedures, they can be registered there. So just making sure that you're safeguarding the property and picking tenants that are going to be suitable for the property, and also not putting tenants in a situation where they're under financial pressure because they're overcommitted to their rent, because no one wants to see that either. What you want is to find somebody who's suited to the property. They're going to take really good care of the property, and they're going to enjoy living there for many years and create a home.
Yeah, you referred earlier in the discussion to the growing incidence of multiple people being on the application for a lease of a rental property.
Yeah.
And you gave one instance where 6 adults jointly applied for a 3-bedroom house. Apparently that's becoming increasingly common. So who do you assess in that? Do you assess all 6 of them, or is there
anyone over the age of 18 has to be on there, has to fill in an application. That's our process. Anyone who's going to be over 18 has to have an application done. And then you have to go through all 6. So that's it. You got to make sure all 6 have got a nice, beautiful rental history, and also that they're a right fit for the property. Like 6 people in a 3-bedroom unit, that's a lot. That's not great wear and tear for an investor on their asset. So, and it's also not a great living environment for if you've got a little 3-bedroom unit and you're fitting 6 adults into it. So I think you're always looking for the right property for the tenants as well. It's the same as if you had 3 people for an apartment and they had 2 rock wheelers. You know, there's more laws now coming in Brisbane about pets, and we're obviously such a huge nation of pet lovers, and you want to be able to have the right pets, but you've also got to have the right pet for the property. You don't want to be putting these big dogs into tiny little units that need to be walked every day, and they're getting left at home to annoy all the neighbours whilst their owners are at work. So I think it is about finding the right fit and making sure it is a good match so that it can be sustainable long term.
Seems to me that every day you're dealing with the sort of problems that would do most of our heads in. There's a lot of work in what you do. It seems to me that you're absolutely earning the fees that you charge.
Our team, I don't think you can ever underestimate what the team do. And I've said it many years, we have an exceptional team of professionals doing it. We're really blessed, and hence why we've been able to earn the reputation that we do have in this space. But the young guys who do this, or the entire team who do this, I believe that if you can be amazing at property management, I don't know that there's any other profession you couldn't be fantastic at. The multitasking, the professional knowledge, the conflict resolution, and they're just dealing with so many people in times of stress, in times of real celebration. I know that heaps of our teams, they absolutely love that phone call of saying, hey, you've been approved, you've got a home. Like the other day, the team at Aspley, a tenant locked himself out and he was in all kinds of dire straits. One of them left the office quickly, ran over, got it. The next thing, he'd provided lunch for the whole team. He'd sent Uber Eats in and everyone got Mexican at lunch. So I think you can't take the human element out of it. You can't. And if you ask them what they love about it is the relationships that they have either with investors or with their tenants as well. And I think the people who thrive in it have really great relationship skills, and they're also amazingly efficient and organized. So it is quite the skill set.
You've talked a little bit about vetting the occupants, the tenants. What about vetting the clients, the owners? Is there a little bit of that as well?
Yeah, it's also really, really necessary. And we can't say yes to everyone. We're not for everyone. We're definitely not, Terry. I think there's people out there offering to do it at a really, really discounted rate. And I think when you have a discounted rate, you need to be expecting a discounted service offering. And two, we can't work with people who are not compliant either. Like there are rules and regulations around this space and we need to adhere to them. And when it comes to things like maintenance that needs to be done at properties, it's for the tenants to be able to live and enjoy the property that they're paying for, that those things have to be done. Those things have to be, we have to be acting in accordance to legislation. So no, there's definitely some landlords and some investors out there who don't want to spend any money on the properties and so forth, or who don't give enough weight to the legislation side of it. And also just, you've got to work with good people, Terry. And I think our team work with them all the time and they work with them regularly. And I really value, we all do, the enjoyment of our team in this role and the happiness of our team in this role. So most of our investors are really grateful and really have fantastic relationships, and that's what you're looking for. So yeah, I do think at the beginning, you have to make sure everyone's online, everyone's looking for the same things.
One of the things I value most about a good property manager is with the properties I own is that when there's a problem that needs to be attended to, there's someone else doing it. I don't have to worry about it. I know that a good property manager will take care of it. You've made the point in our previous discussions about the importance of owners being proactive with maintenance issues. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, I just think there's more and more changing minimum housing standards, particularly here in Southeast Queensland. I know Victoria now, there's so much new legislation as well down there, but I think it always costs you to be reactive with maintenance. I think the cost of maintenance is becoming the trades, getting trades to the property, being able to get, most people want multiple quotes. The days of getting 3 quotes on something that's going to be around $200, trades now are charging to quote because there is so much work here in Southeast Queensland. We are inundated with infrastructure projects. We've got, like, even in the residential space and what has been happening for the last 2 years, there's not just this plethora of trades waiting to jump out and do the little work. So we have amazing trade relationships, which are crucial to us being able to get service. But one of the changes that's coming in Queensland on the 30th of September is that the bond has to all be accounted for, and any invoices for works to be done or taken out of the bond have to be done within 14 days of the vacate. Now, when you factor in that if there's damage to the property or works needing to be done that require trades, we've got to get them there, we've got to get them quoted on, we've got to get them approved, all within a 2-week period. And those turnaround times on certain trades, like 3 or 4 months ago, getting a roofer anywhere in Queensland was almost impossible. There's certain trades that it is quite hard to get. So being proactive with your maintenance, trying to do it ahead of time, trying to make sure there's like doing things like pest control now. It just should be an annual part of your plan to take care of the property. Even with air conditioning here in Queensland, that's an emergency repair if it goes down, especially in summer here. So having an annual check of your air conditioning to avoid it going down and then the tenant getting someone else out to get it fixed, or us having to get someone else out really quickly to get it fixed. There's lots of different steps you can take to just make sure you're looking after it and you can sort of expect it. And obviously you're taking care of the asset, which this is, if you're holding it long term, that's the point too, isn't it?
One of the reasons why we have a shortage of new construction of homes in Australia is that it's very hard to get the tradespeople that they need, because we have such a big infrastructure spend happening, not just in growth areas like the Sunshine Coast, but right across the country. I think tradespeople can earn a lot more money when working on those big ticket items than building houses. So imagine there's a similar problem with maintenance issues with properties. Just keep finding the trades that you need. The shortage of that must be an issue.
Yeah, definitely. And a large portion of the jobs that we would be sending trades to would hopefully be under that 350, 400. It's a little fix of this and a little fix of that. A lot of things that if you lived in the property yourself, you might do yourself. But if you've got a tenant in the property and things need to be fixed, you don't. And so you don't have this huge amount of trades just sitting there ready to go out and do those jobs. I think certain trades, particularly electrical and plumbing, we've got great electrical and plumbing. I think it is more around if we're doing some work on a deck and it's not a huge amount of work, it's not a big job, but it's a substantial amount. It is getting multiple quotes and multiple people who want to take on that work. I think there's a lot of people in Southeast Queensland who seem to be renovating, and those big renovation jobs are taking a lot of the trades as well. But I don't know that this gets better in the lead up to the Olympics. I don't know that we are going to have more people. So I think it's just, again, if you're well planned out between tenants going in and out, you have someone attend, do some work, get some things updated, then hopefully we're minimizing those call outs without the unplanned call outs. You can't mitigate all of them. You're always going to have some of those electrical and plumbing issues. But if you can mitigate with some annual maintenance at the property, I think that's a really smart idea.
Okay. Is it also smart for the investor owner to trust their property manager and give them approval to just go ahead and fix things up to a certain level of cost, perhaps, without having to refer to the owner constantly?
Yeah, and look, at a lot of our investors do that, and a lot of our investors, one of the reasons why that's so good is because it allows for a really quick turnaround on getting things done. Things don't drag out. The tenant is not inconvenienced by things lasting longer. If we've got to get multiple people there to quote, that's going to add time to getting the problem resolved. And I think that's where you've got to have that trust in trades. Like, you've got to work with certain trades that that you do trust, that when they're going there, they're charging you exactly what it costs, and it's a good pass on for the owner. So I think when you have those, there should be that, having that property manager you trust make those decisions for you allows it just to all keep moving along. We've got so many of our investors interstate, quite a few internationals, so it works well for them. But I understand big part of being a property manager for an owner is that trust. Then you've got to make sure you're making decisions as a property manager with the money as if it was your own money too. Like, you've got to look over quotes, because sometimes we do get quotes back and we're like, oh, that's ridiculous. And that they don't really want the work, but for a certain price they would do it for that. And so we're here, and we've got a maintenance team as well. Our teams are meant to be scrutinizing that and making sure at all times that the investor is getting value for money on the works as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the value of a good tenant. I'm aware that a couple of properties that I own that I haven't actually maximised the rental to the absolute upper limit of what the market might pay for that property, because I'm aware that I'll probably lose my tenant. They couldn't afford to pay that extra rental. I believe there's value in keeping a good tenant in place who's been reliable, looks after the place, pays the rent on time, rather than trying to squeeze the last drop of rent out of the property. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. And look, our whole team are trained whenever they're talking to owners about a renewal compared to a relet of a vacant property, that the pricing strategy should be different. When we're putting a property to market and it's coming to the market for the first time, that is your chance to see what could this achieve, and like if we're opening it up without a tenant in it. When we're renewing a property, and we don't charge a renewal fee at Image Property, a lot of agencies do. So for me, business wise, it'd be better to always say, hey, like, let's get rid of the tenant and relet it, because that's so, it's financially for us, but it just doesn't make sense, and it's not what we do. It's, if you've got a great tenant in place, you've got to factor that into the equation when you're looking at what the renewal should be. So you need to take all the market evidence in to account. What are properties like yours achieving? If you've got a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in a certain suburb, you want to see what they're achieving, but then you should factor in a value for that tenant staying in place, because one, you save money by not reletting the property. You don't pay advertising, you don't pay a relet fee to us, you don't have any vacancy. So even in that financial cost there, on an average, let's say the median, like a $600 a week property, you're at least going to cost yourself around $1,000 to relet the property. So the weekly increase should take into fact that you haven't had to do that, and also that you haven't got the wear and tear, and you've got a great tenant. Like, and when you've got a great tenant at your property who takes care of your property, looks after your property, it's definitely a value, definitely. And it just allows for you'd have a less worry about the property if you've already got a tried and tested asset there. So we would always advise that you factor in a tenant and how well they've looked after your property and how good they've been there when you're looking at the price that you're renewing the lease for.
Okay, so let's pivot a little and talk about one of the new vogue things out there in real estate that some people get excited about because of yield, and that's dual living, co-living type properties. Perhaps not everything they're cracked up to be. There's pros and cons. I guess there is with everything in real estate, but let's talk about that issue a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think there's exactly that, exact pros and cons to it. We see a few people talking about it more and more at the moment. There's a few houses getting built with the square meterage a little bit different to what it normally is to allow for it in certain suburbs. I think in certain areas too, I think there's, it makes sense in an area that's close to maybe a university or so forth. And we've seen them work well with that, where you've got people who would have that need to live in one room and share the others. I think there's some costs involved that people don't factor in. I think the overall cost that the return looks like to be so much higher. So we've seen properties that you could possibly rent at 640, then they're like, oh, but if we rented each individual room, we can get closer to 900. You've also got to take into account, you can't pass on costs. If you're not subdivide like water and electricity and things like that, there's going to be costs you incur. You also have a larger change of tenancy just by the nature of it. You're going to have more tenancies go in and out. And you've also got to factor in that those tenants have to live together harmoniously. So when they're sharing kitchen spaces and communal areas, everything has to go well in that environment, and everyone has to get along. So I think there's a little bit more to take into account, but there's definitely people who are doing it and doing it successfully. So I think just the in and out you're going to have on the property, I think you need to expect it to be higher in that situation.
Just expand a little bit on that issue you touched on about not being able to pass on costs and that type of living.
Well, you could factor them into the weekly rent, yes, but you wouldn't have a subdivision of water. So if you had one tenant who was there, who was in the shower, like and electricity and so forth, those costs are incurred by the house, and you could factor them into what your weekly is. So it would be an inclusive fee, but you're going to have to pay those costs. So if you do have tenants who really run up those kind of costs, and everyone is different about that. I know that if my children left the air conditioning on all night, I'd be very upset. But I think with those kind of things, it's like an Airbnb, isn't it? Like once you go to the property, there's no way of knowing if someone was there and they left everything running the whole time they were there or not. So those costs are costs that it's inclusive in your weekly rent, but you can't subdivide those costs.
If you, the occupant, aren't paying the bills for
I do.
Well, then there's not much incentive to be a conservationist.
I'm only going by my 12-year-old, and no, he has no need to be a conservationist. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so, but presumably some benefits in that type of property as well. Technically, at least high yields.
Yes. Yeah. Technically, there are technically beneficial high yields. Yes. I think it's interesting because I think Australia at the moment are rethinking with the situations around housing, how we live. I think there is a lot more people moving into, the whole dream of having a big house with a big backyard and a fence and is not necessarily how it will continue. I think we're going to have more high density population in it. We can't just keep sprawling. So, and I think there's a lot of people coming from overseas who expect to live they've come from environments where they have lived in units and things like that. So I think it is an interesting time where people are thinking, well, if we're living differently, and maybe this is one of the different types of options on the table. And I think there's a different demographics who it could be really appealing for. I think people downsizing, it could meet the needs of those, but I think it needs to play out for a little while. I think I'd be interested to see, especially where they're popping up. I don't know that they've always got I think if they were situated more around things like hospitals and universities, it makes a lot of sense for me in those kind of environments, but it'd be interesting to see how they go in those other suburbs that don't necessarily have those same amenities.
So in the markets that you operate in, tell us a little bit about the reality of vacancy rates and just how much is available, because we're reading so much about it in media. It's a daily story about how tight rental markets are. What's the reality at ground level?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and I think it's different suburbs. I think it's really interesting to. I was surprised the other day to put in a suburb just in a city in Brisbane that had a vacancy rate just under 3%, which has been a really long time since anything in Brisbane has sort of reflected that 3%. We always taught and have taught our team that 3% represents sort of an equilibrium of a market where the tenants and the landlords are sort of both. And that's where sort of rents are just sort of sitting. They're not moving up, they're not moving down. And we've sort of got that equilibrium. We've been in many parts under 1% for a really long time. So that obviously represents massive rental growth. But I do think there are some pockets who are getting back up to the 2% and so forth. We've at Image there's a few properties taking a little bit longer because they've come into areas where there's been a lot of development and a lot of houses handed over recently in the outer suburbs as well. But I do also think that pricing is played in. I think there's a lot of investors coming to market at the moment thinking that they're going to achieve these really large prices, but the last quarter here in Brisbane was our first quarter of rental decline. It wasn't huge, but I do think it is a bit more reality about what we can achieve and pricing the properties appropriately for that. So 18 days online as an average across sort of isn't representative of stock just going up and down at the moment. So whilst the media is like, oh, there's nothing, there is quite a few properties taking a little bit longer to find the right tenants for at the moment.
Okay, so is this a significant change in the market that we're now starting to see unfolding?
It's interesting because it's a funny time of year to have it to try and work out if it's a change in the market or if it's just that we're in a little bit of a quieter time. We know that here in Queensland, particularly in Brisbane, we have peaks. You know, the end of January, February, March is definitely sees the highest amount of inquiry on realestate.com, and June, July also. So this period that we're in right now, there's still demand and we're still leasing properties, definitely, but there's not that same amount of people transients, like starting university, moving at this time. So it'll be interesting to see if it is continued or if it is just representative of a little bit of a lull here before we kick off again in January next year. But I think based on the fact that it's the first quarter of declined, you know, rents going a little bit back, and not by a lot, but rents did go backwards in Southeast Queensland in the last quarter. And that was the first time in many years. So it's interesting to see. I think that we have definitely found a spot where they just can't keep climbing at the rate they were. I don't think people have that amount of money to pay for rent.
There definitely is a ceiling.
Yes.
My assumption is that most people out there as tenants, not all, but most, would be people who have lower incomes. Therefore, there's a limit to just how much they can pay as a percentage of their income and rent.
Yeah, look, I think you get both. I think you get the younger professionals who I think were living in spaces that maybe they couldn't afford to buy in. I think you have a lot of those guys who professional couples who wanted to be in certain areas for the amenities, but maybe that wasn't where they were going to purchase. You still have a lot of those. We have a lot of people rent vesting who own properties elsewhere as well. It's becoming a much, much bigger thing. You see it all the time, actually. And then you have long-term tenants as well who, and I also believe that you get, when you've got immigration to Australia and international immigration, which have had quite a bit of lately, like they're not looking to buy in their first 12 to 18 months of being here. I don't think for reasons with visas and so forth that they would be really able to or positioned to. So they can be here and earning a decent wage and so forth, but not looking to purchase in the market at that time. But yeah, I do think that your outer suburbs, where your medians have just gone up and up, and some of the increases in some of those suburbs, it just has not been reflective of the increase in wages of the people living out there as well.
Yeah. Interesting, that trend about rent vesters. You've got potentially clients, landlords who actually understand what it's like to be a tenant at the same time as being a landlord. That's a bit of a dichotomy.
It's you know what, it's actually, Terry, it's one of the most lovely referrals we get is when we have a tenant who says, hey, I have a property and I'd love you guys to manage it, because it just is a reflection that they're happy with the way that they've, we've been managing them as a tenant, and that we'd also love to manage them as an investor too. So, and we have quite a few actually who we manage them as an investor, and they're also a tenant on our books. So it's nice.
Yeah, I always think that the best deal in real estate, as in anywhere else, is a win-win situation. So I guess that's the goal as a property manager, to have a happy owner and a happy tenant, and that's achievable.
Yeah, it's definitely achievable. I think that we'd like to say that we achieve it more than we don't. You can't always get every situation right, definitely not. And we are very much here to represent both parties, but it's very achievable. I think that you've got a lot of great investors and landlords out there. I think that's a story that's very rarely spoken about. Like, if you look at the media, it's like, oh, greedy landlords, rents up. I could not tell you how many owners we go to with market advice at renewal, and it's completely factual. It's not, hey, let your property manager just pluck a number out of the air and tell you what you should increase the rent to. We just give the evidence of what has been achieved, and then our recommendations based on that evidence. So it is just a factual passing on of data. But the amount of owners just like stuff, you're like, oh no, that would be way. I don't want to do that. Sarah and Bill can't afford that. No, just put it up $30, or just not. We had to have private inspections at a property not long ago in one of the suburbs because the owner had no need. He said no need to achieve what it could achieve, and it went online hundreds of dollars below what other properties of the equivalent in that area. We're like, if we put we had people submit applications before opening up, because we're like, there'll be hundreds of people at this open home if we don't have them submit their applications first. So when it was advertised, but you have those situations all the time. So I think it'd be nice if we had a bit more media representing both sides in that respect too, because we have so many lovely investors.
A balanced media that's fair to all parties. That's an interesting objective. I don't think it's achievable in our lifetime.
It's just they don't make it a good, the good stories are not as salacious, are they? It's not as clickbaity.
They tend to highlight the extremes, don't they? The bad tenants who cause tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage, and the bad landlords who mistreat their tenants or provide substandard homes. But I think the mainstream, both for tenants and for landlords, is people behaving well in most cases.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's been our experience, and hence why we've got a team who, and I think when you've got a professional property manager too, and who does communicate really thoroughly, I think that's probably the number one key. I think that's the biggest gripe of both parties, is an investor who can't get hold of his property manager, or and a tenant who doesn't get a response from their property manager. So I think if you just communicating effectively and thoroughly with both parties, I think can definitely be a successfully mitigated process.
Okay. Corinne, we've ranged across quite a few topics. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about, or perhaps a parting message for investors that you think that they should hear?
No, look, I think it's exciting to see that investors are sort of, I think, feeling a bit more sentiment, and there seems to be some encouraging signs that a few more investors are getting back in the market. I think particularly here in Southeast Queensland, I think that it's a really strong market at the moment, and I think for investors it's probably a really great time to jump in. It's nice to see our investors holding as well, I think, and we're really blessed here that we've started out with so many investors who started out with one or two properties and have grown and grown. So it's a lovely journey to be part of.
Okay. So if anybody out there watching and listening would like to know more, or would like to follow up and say, I really want this person to be handling my property, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, look, I'm always happy for anyone to reach out, investors to reach out to me personally at corinne@imageproperty.com.au, or you can reach out on our website to talk to any of our team. But yeah, we're always happy to take on new investors and help them along the way.
Okay, and Corinne spelled as you can see it on your screen, I hope.
Yes.
For those who want to make sure they get the spelling of that email address right.
Yes.
Yeah,
no, definitely.
Okay. Well, Corinne Bohan, Managing Director of Image Property, thanks for your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed discussing all those issues with you. And let's do it again in not too distant future.
No, definitely, Terry. I always value your opinion and listening to your advice. I feel very lovely to have been on here with you. So thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.
Thank